In a perfect world, all of our devices, our printers and monitors and screens on our phones, would all be able to display or print all of the colors that the human eye can see. But they can't. In fact, not only does each device display a subset of colors, different devices display different subsets of colors. Or to put it another way, if we think of a device as being able to represent a certain number of crayons, then different devices not only have different numbers of crayons, so some will have 10 while others will have 20, they also have different colored crayons. So one might have 3 blues and 3 greens, while another only has 2 blues but 4 greens. Now, there are many different reasons that different devices represent different colors. Take a screen, for example. It uses an additive process to represent color, where adding equal parts of red, green, and blue light produces white. While printing technologies use a subtractive process to represent color, where adding together cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink creates black. Another reason for this difference is that not all screens nor all printing technologies are created equally. Manufacturers use different materials of different quality to meet the needs of different customers. So, keeping in mind that different devices display different colors, we need to figure out how many colors we need to work with when creating and editing our images in Photoshop so that they will contain the colors that we want to show across all of the devices that we're outputting to. In order to do so, we're going to take a look at 4 different color spaces in Photoshop: sRGB, Adobe RGB, ProPhoto, and CMYK. Now, imagine that the color shape, that horseshoe on the left, represents all of the colors visible to the human eye. Of course, it doesn't, but conceptually, it will give us an idea of the relationship between the 4 different color spaces. So the triangle represents the sRGB color space. It's a relatively small color space in comparison to the color gamut of the human eye. Most monitors and screens can display all of the colors in the sRGB color space, so it may be a great color space to work in if you know that you're only going to publish to the screen. But sRGB isn't typically the best color space for editing images because most images captured by digital cameras contain far more colors that are in the sRGB color space. Therefore, if you convert to and work in the sRGB color space, most likely you're discarding a significant number of colors in the image. And with fewer colors, we wouldn't have the latitude to make large color and tonal edits to the file without negatively impacting the quality of the image. So that takes us to the Adobe RGB color space. It is a larger color space than sRGB. Most high-quality monitors and screens can display all of the colors in Adobe RGB. It's the most popular color space because of the latitude it has when making edits. And almost the entire Adobe RGB color gamut can be printed by inkjet printers, especially those that have more than 4 color inks. The only drawback to working in a larger color space is when we do convert our images to sRGB to publish on screen, there might be shifts in some color as the image is reduced down to the smaller color space. When we look at ProPhoto, we can see that it's even larger than the Adobe RGB color space, and many people, especially photographers, work in ProPhoto to take advantage of that higher quality color information when they're processing or making edits to their files. However, because the color space is so large, there are times when you might not be able to accurately see all of the colors on your screen, which may lead to surprises such as color shifts and banding when converting to smaller color spaces from ProPhoto. Finally, when we look at the CMYK color space, which is the color space used to output images to a conventional printing press, we can see that the color space is quite limited. While some designers work in the CMY color space because they know that their work is only going to be output to a printing press, this is a less popular workflow nowadays since much of the content that we create is repurposed for display both in print and on screen. So instead, I would suggest that you work in a larger color space and then convert to the CMYK color space when you're ready to print and for sRGB for posting online. All right, let's move to Photoshop. Now, to set your default working space in Photoshop, we can choose Edit and then come down to the color settings. The default for your working space is going to be sRGB. If you're a photographer, you might want to change that to ProPhoto or to the Adobe RGB color space. But if you're designing only for screen, then maybe you want to leave it set at sRGB. You'll want to choose the color space that makes the most sense for your workflow. Or you can leave it as is, because below in the color management policies for RGB, CMYK, and grayscale images, Photoshop is going to preserve the embedded profiles. So if you open a file into Photoshop that's in another color space, Photoshop is not going to do anything to that file. It's not going to convert it. The file will remain in the color space that it was originally opened into in Photoshop. So files from Lightroom Classic and Lightroom will open into the ProPhoto color space. And in Lightroom Classic, you can change whether or not you want it to open in ProPhoto or in Adobe RGB using the external editing preferences. And if you're starting in Bridge and editing in Camera Raw, then you can set the color space under Camera Raw's workflow settings, which we'll cover in depth in the Camera Raw chapter. Excellent. There we go. An overview of the 4 most common color spaces that you'll be working with in Photoshop.